you can see my screen. All right, so there's a few things that we're going to cover today. The first thing that I want to do is take you through the portfolio of evidence templates, just so that you understand how things are being dealt with, how your portfolio of evidence is going to be put together, and so that you understand which information to capture where. What we'll then do is we'll go over to one of the students from last year who will be presenting UiPath to you, so that you can get familiar with UiPath for your next project. Richard, who is the student from last year, is going to be taking you through testing and then also through RPA, which is then where we introduce UiPath. This is going to be important for project 4 because those are the technologies or essentially the elements and components that you'll be using to complete the project. So if we look at the portfolio of evidence, there are a few things that we need to think about. The first one is going to be all the information that you've gathered throughout the semester. So some of you would have stored a lot of your stuff in Word documents, which is completely okay. But if you want your portfolio of evidence to be automatically populated by the automation, you're going to need to go into the forms that are in the wiki and also listed in this document. Essentially, they are the same forms. I'm just showing you exactly which forms are filling in which information. You're going to then need to capture that information that you have in your Word documents into the form so that your document can be populated like this. It's also just to ensure that the information that we have is going to be what we mark. All right, so in the beginning of the semester, you would have gotten the module preparation form, which you would have had to complete. If you haven't completed it yet, it is still open, so you can still complete it. But essentially, this is where we get some of the information around what you perceive to be your current field of interest, what languages you think you're most proficient in, also some of the information down here at the bottom about your current skill set, where you rate yourself, and then also looking at the expectations and ambitions you had for the module, with your potential career paths that you were looking at choosing. This was something we wanted you to do in the beginning of the semester so that you could see by the end of the semester how this changes. So there'll be another form towards the end of the semester where you can reevaluate your skills and we can show you what the difference was. Then, training and certifications, you should be completing this per project. So as you get a project that you complete, there are certain criteria or certain categories of training that we've asked you to complete. And those categories of training, we've asked you to log on the training and certifications form. Based on the categories that you select, that information will be pre-populated under these sections over here. And there is also a section for others. So if you've done any additional training that you would want to do, it is also there. Okay, then project results is being pre-populated from your result list. So what we'll do is we'll do an extract from gradebook and then take your marks that you got from gradebook, put those in over here, and then just link up your rubrics so that you can see exactly what your results were and you can go see what the rubric looks like. Okay. Retrospectives, for every project you would be doing retrospectives. We had a bit of an issue with the one form that didn't allow students to resubmit answers for project 2. So we've got the 2 forms. The V2 form should be working continuously now for the rest of the project. There won't be another form unless this one falls over and doesn't allow you to respond. Then we'll create another one, but I don't think that's necessary. It should be set up now correctly. So between those 2 lists, we'll take all of those answers in and then populate the retrospectives. Community engagement, there is a form that you need to complete. So based on your selections in the form, we'll be filling in the contribution and the extraction of knowledge sections. Class attendance is automatically populated from the virtual class attendance. So we have attendance lists that are then going to be used. And then class participation is going to be marked automatically from your submissions that you've pulled through from the different homework assignments and the quizzes. So not necessarily your marks for the homework would count. It's just that you actually contributed and you participated and you did the homework and you did the quizzes. That's going to be what pulls through here. And then part of the completion will actually say what your mark was, but that isn't going to affect your participation for class in essence. Just also an important thing to note, the class attendance and the quizzes that are happening in class won't count for distance students. That will only be for contact students who have to attend class. I believe Prof. Kutsia will handle the distance students differently. Okay, so that's the portfolio of evidence. Are there any questions? Okay, let me just check here quick. All right, may I please elaborate more on how to add dependency injection on the program CS file? Okay, please go check last week's class because I've mentioned it in there. And also, I see Richard's posted a link. Thank you for that. Okay, but this tutorial doesn't have the necessary codes. Okay, I'm sure you will figure that out. Do we fill in the POE or is it done by the lecturers? We've got an automation that does this. You just need to fill in the forms. So this is going to be to make sure that we have all the correct information to mark you off of, and then the POE is going to be what you submit back to have a proof of submission, essentially for the marking of your POE. Then there's another comment from the one who says, because I see there are some fields that are probably not applicable for us to fill in. It depends. So all of those fields should actually be filled in by you, or at least have information that you provided for that. So I'm not sure if there's specific fields that you saw, Ruan, that you think that you don't need to populate. If that is the case, please just pop them down so we can clarify that. And then are there any other questions around this? Okay, ma'am, regarding project 2. Okay, guys, project 2 queries, please deal with those on the form. I'm not going to deal with them in the chat. I've released the vol marks. So please use the form to query your marks. I did post an announcement on Ifundi to tell you that there are guidelines to use when you have any issues. I'm not going to be making any exceptions. Please make sure that you use the items that we've put forward. Okay, and then if there are no other questions related to the POE, I'll hand over to Richard.
Okay, yeah, let me quickly share and we can run through everything. Okay, let's quickly just run through the testing, and then yeah, I'm just gonna open the chat on the one side. Okay, yeah, the first thing we're gonna just run through is testing. Now, this you can call it a field on its own. There's a lot of people that do certifications just to go into the testing field and be able to test projects through automation. I worked with a few developers that were specialized in that. So the way it works is you break it down into different modules. Unit testing would, okay, sorry, just quickly to read that. Unit testing is we're just testing an individual piece of work to make sure it's good. Integration is then the next step up where you actually put that unit of work. So this could be an individual scope, a class, anything that's just a piece of code in with your larger solution and test that everything works correctly. Then you do regression testing. This is essentially just backtracking where you test your current version against your previous version and make sure that you don't lose any features. Smoke and alpha beta testing are a bit less used. I haven't really ran into any places where we actually pulled those in, but acceptance testing and stress, the last 3 are extremely important. I don't know if any of you try to watch the rugby this weekend on the SABC streaming platform. I can tell you for a fact those people did not do stress or performance testing, because as soon as the system got loaded with quite a large number of users, it fell over and they had to restart. So these 3 come into play, and the only one I don't see on this list is security testing, where it's normally we call it penetration testing, where you would actually make sure that there are no backdoors or open code or passwords available to the end user. That's also an important one that gets done in the later stages to make sure that the system is actually locked down. Especially if your system is publicly available, you will see that that gets done a lot. I think, yeah, that does form part of smoke testing a bit, but we generally pull it out as its own separate entity. So yeah, UAT is extremely important. It's kind of the final phase of your program where after you've built and developed it, it gets pulled, you give it over to the client and they rigorously test it and make sure that every feature they asked for is working correctly and that they can't find any bugs. If everybody's happy, you have a user acceptance testing sign-off. Yeah, normally with user acceptance testing, you give the person who will be testing it, so normally it would be the client, a list of test cases, scenarios that they can run through as examples. A lot of them do their own testing as well, but normally you would just give them a few, 5 or 6 test cases that they can run through on their own and verify that what you got out of the system is what they get out. You guys need to be aware that the way a solution or a program functions in a development environment while you're coding it, so the way it functions when you're in Visual Studios does not directly translate to when you've published and deployed it. It can break between those two steps. We've noticed it before. So normally you would do tests, just set up tests just to validate that everybody is seeing the right thing, even if given the right inputs. Yeah, we're going to do the demo in a bit. I think let's just run through a quick introduction to automation and talk about what the different types are. So you have your 3 big ones. You have RPA, BPA, and intelligence automation. RPA is essentially where I always give the example, if you have a person that every morning when they get to work, they need to fill in an Excel spreadsheet, given a list of emails that they received during the night. And that's happening over and over and over again. You have a large chance you can go automate that. The thing with RPA is if you have a stable list with business rules, so log in, check your emails, write them down, you know those steps are stable, you can automate the process. That's kind of the entire idea behind it. Business process automation is essentially a subset of normal RPA, where you would be taking small individual business processes. Again, I think the person checking the email and writing those emails down into a spreadsheet would be a good example as well of business automation, where you could go automate that process for them. Now, in the industry currently, the Microsoft Power Platform kind of takes lead, just given everybody has some sort of Microsoft license being run. There are other tools like UiPath, Lentex K2. OpenRPA is another good one, but it gets used less frequently because it's not really known to be a standard. And then, yeah, you have intelligence automation, where it's essentially if you're pulling AI into your automation. So you're busy scraping a website or running through PDFs and you're looking for specific items where AI would be nice to put in, that's when it gets used. So the life cycle is pretty much for RPAs very close to normal software development. You go ahead, discover what the issue is, and then run through, build, manage. So manage and deploy kind of run together, where we done with the development, we go put it into production. Then you run your automations. Generally, the automations are either triggered, meaning if a user clicks a button, it runs, or it's fully automated. So it runs on its own time. So either you have a schedule, or let's say you have an email coming into your inbox. That would be a form of unattended automation. Engage with people and robots team. Yes, normally you don't want to build something that goes directly against what the business is trying to do. That's just bad. and then being able to measure if the automation is actually helping becomes a big part. Yeah, it's a pretty wide field. In terms of UiPath, there's quite a number of different features. I think the ones that we will be mainly talking about is the orchestrator, the studio. When you guys are installing it, just a note, don't install the business studio. Is it Studio X? Yeah, don't install Studio X. Just install the normal studio. It's meant for two different audiences. The Studio X is meant for users that are generally not code oriented. So it's a lot more friendly. Whereas if you're a developer, you use the normal studio because it's a lot more feature rich and you have a lot more control over your individual components. We will also be touching on robots then, because that's essentially what this is all about. And then the assistant will also come into play. I'll show you guys two different automations, one that uses the assistant, and then also just run you guys through the test automation I did last year. I was thinking of doing a web monitor, but it appears that my dependencies don't want to play with me this morning. Yeah, so essentially the value of automating a process is that the end user does not need to spend time on that repetitive task anymore. We free them up to go do something else. Generally, this has a big impact on cost, where let's say you have a user that once a month needs to go set up a report for their boss. And the layout of the report is every time the same, but the content changes. And it takes them a week to get that report built up. By automating the process, we've essentially saved the company a week's worth of time, and they have the report on demand. So if it's, let's say it normally gets generated at the end of the month, but all of a sudden they need it in the middle of the month, they can just go run the automation and get the report. It has a lot of time and energy advantages. Let's quickly run through the process. So yeah, a PDD, or process definition document, is essentially a document that shows what is the current process, so the as is, what the manual steps are that the user is doing, and can they be pinned down. So we try to make sure that those steps are the same between iterations. So it's, if I do the report this way this month, do I do it exactly the same the next month? That gives us an idea of whether it would be possible to automate the process. Then you draw out your 2B, where you go and you take that process, you go step for step, and you figure out, okay, what can be automated? And you lay out the automated steps. But you also need to still show, let's say the user input is required, then you would have certain steps that still follow as manual steps. Yeah, it's a flow diagram at the end of the day. Both of them are. It's just you lay them out to show what is manual, what is automated, and what other forms of automation are in place. So if you, for example, have an application as a front end where the user goes and inputs all that information, you have two systems that play there. You have the manual part, which is the user inputting the information, and then you have the background part that's actually taking that information and building out your document, for example, at the end of the day. Then, yeah, building out your business rules. This is extremely important. If you don't have stable business rules, you're going to be in trouble. You need to know, trying to think of a good example of what would be a business rule. Generally, it tends to be like a formula that says our profit rate is 15%, so that you can go work that back into your code. And then test cases. Test cases generally are given by the customer. So they would tell you, okay, this is how we did it by hand. Go test your automation against it and make sure that you actually get the same output. Once you've got your process flow, which is just a broad overview of what are we going to be doing with the automation done, you work on a solution definition document. Essentially what that is, we take that process and we say, okay, we are going to be using these technologies. So if you say, okay, I'm going to be using either UiPath, OpenRPA, Power Automate, and you say, okay, within that space, I'm going to be using the studio, unattended robot with an attended robot, and an app, for example. And you go lay out your more in-depth flow diagram that shows every step of the process you're taking from the moment the user gave you the input to the moment you have your output. So opening an Excel file, inputting values, all of those steps get listed down in a diagram with details. Your solution definition document is essentially we're giving a medium level. We do go high level as well, so a high to medium level of information around what we will be doing and how it will be done. Building process. Yeah, this is essentially, we give them a high level architecture, what info software we're going to be using, what architectures, all that stuff gets laid out. Licensing implications is also a big one. What about that? Where normally the individual user, the personal guy, does not really have an implication on licenses. We play with the community editions, or maybe if you doing a bit more, you would have the professional edition of either Visual Studios or UiPath. But as soon as you walk into a company, you under a different rule set. These guys work with licenses. So you need to know, okay, if I want to do this, let's say I want to set up an automation that runs unattended. Your unattended automation is going to need a license, something behind it so that you can get the resources to run it. That becomes a big implication. Things in the business world aren't free. That's essentially what it comes down to. So you draw out your technical 2B, which is, it's a flow diagram that shows your different steps that you're laying out in the application. I think I have one somewhere that I can show you guys, just need to find it, but we'll get to that. Then you look for standards. You want to be standardizing your process as much as possible. Normally you would try to make it generic so that you can use it somewhere else as well. That's the entire reason with project 3 that we did. It's got different names, but I call it obfuscation, where you separating the layers down. I don't know what the word was, can't remember it right now. But essentially you try to make your things generic and standard so that it can be reused. Patterns are just you looking to find things that are happening repetitively, or your standard business rules that can be placed somewhere and you know they're not probably going to change. But overall, you need to be able to work dynamically so that if, for example, something changes, it's not hard to change it. Yeah. Do not hard code values. Nothing there's very little that stays static. You need to be able to run things on demand. Managing the process. Okay, so this comes back to our testing, where we are going to go through, and I'm going to show you guys mine, but I doubt it's going to be of consequence at this point. I'm just going to show you guys the general layout. But you're trying to test the application for known errors, so that, let's say, for example, the things that you worked into your application, for example, if they don't put in a username, but they try to log in, your system needs to catch that. But you're also trying to check for unknown errors at the same time. So if, for example, they asked for a integer, you go put in a decimal to see how the system reacts. You try to catch as many bugs as possible before it goes to the user, so that it essentially just proves quality. You need to flush out an application. Yes, you log down the details of each error so that you can go repeat it in a later stage when you're doing debugging and actually fix it. Once they resolved, you rerun those exact same tests. So this is kind of the reason we automate the testing process. If your application is big, so you've got multiple screens with multiple inputs, you would generally try to automate the process where you go feed it a standard list of inputs and you check the output and you compare that against what you were expecting, your known good. Normally your known good is going to come from doing it manually. And then if you do see an error, you track it down, or if something broke within the application, normally you would save the error log and go through that and fix the process. And then, yeah, essentially you just keep repeating that process until you get to a point where you have no errors left. Yeah, we will quickly run through all of these, just show you the different types. And okay, so the action center doesn't really get used all that often, but these big three, your apps, your assistant, and your orchestrator, get used a lot, especially when you're working with UiPath. I think I'm still going to start with the orchestrator, as it forms essentially the framework, the base level for all this. Just quickly waiting for it to log in. It takes a while. Just grab and move this way. So your orchestrator is where all your processes lie. So these things, it's a really complicated layout for how UiPath really does this thing, but you can think of your orchestrator as like the good word for this. I would say it's your main view into your application. So this is it's a dashboard essentially. It's a dashboard with a lot more into it, but you can use it as one. Where you can see at the moment I've got one process running or ready to run with two different machines. So it kind of sits above everything and says, okay, you've got it. Becomes really important when you're working in big companies where you've got a lot of robots running on a lot of different machines and you want to be able to monitor each one in depth. So if we, for example, go to my automations, you can see I've got one automation published. Now, the way this works is you would use the studio to actually create your automation, and then you publish it to your orchestrator. Then it lives there. And then you assign a machine to this automation. So I say, for example, my Ruby creator. I would take the Ruby creator and say, okay, you're going to run on, what machines do I have? I think I only have one set up at the moment, even though it says 2. You're going to run on the Legion. And then it makes that link. And on the Legion, you've got an assistant. This little tiny program. Now, assistant is essentially where if you have direct automations, you can run them from here. And then the orchestrator just keeps track of when was it run, what's the... So queues are also, you can spend all day talking about them, but essentially if you have multiple items flowing in, they will come lie in a queue, and then from the queue, you would have a process or a robot process them one by one. Okay, yeah, so the automation side of things is, yeah, so if I, for example, click on my app, I can run it and it opens my interface. So it essentially, this is where it's been developed or deployed to post development. So this would be a production version. This one is just an automation, so it does not have a fancy front end. It just expects an input, it runs, and it's cloud. It gives you an out at the end of the day. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers, oh yeah, and everything kind of lays within a workspace. So you can have a shared workspace, which would be the equivalent of, you wouldn't call it a repo, but you could have multiple different, this is where teams come to collaborate, would be within a shared workspace. So here you would have processes and automations lying that were written by different people within the same organization. They're separate. So this is like private and this is semi-private, where everyone in your organization can see it, but nobody publicly. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers the big things. Within Orchestrator, you can develop apps. So this is generally if you have a automation that you need a front end for, you would create it here. So like for the Ruby creator I did, I had to give it a front end. That was kind of one of the mandatories. So you create it, and then from that, let me see, I just want to remember where my things were. I don't remember where I did all this. I did this stuff too long ago. Oh yeah. So yeah, this is my front end, and then I have a robot running behind it. And then this robot expects a bunch of inputs. If I go to my inputs, there they are. And then I'm just pulling my inputs from my front end. So there's just a pretty way for if you're giving this through to a no-code user so that they can actually use it correctly. Integration Studio, another thing that it's a 50-50. It's a really specific tool that allows you to add, for example, if you are working with internal server, or example, you've got a server running on AWS. Asana is another big one. Or Gmail. These are just if you want to integrate with an external system that isn't something you developed. This is where you would come and set that up. And yeah, just a typical admin panel. And then marketplace is just if you're looking for something, but it's really generic, there's a high likelihood that someone's already pre-built it. So you can just come here and find it. I don't know how far they went, but I do believe you can get, yeah, we do have pre-built automations ready to go. This is actually a new one that's pretty good, where it's essentially an API connection to the OpenAI framework, so to GPT-4 built into a connector. So it took an AI and pushed it out as activities so that you can bring that back into your current automation. But yeah, this is generally where you would go to find ready to go automations that you just want to be able to do something and you don't see the use of developing it on your own. Okay, I think let's quickly go through. I think this is really important for you guys to know. This is just going to be the general layout that you want to look at when you are building your test automation. So with the way, let's actually start at the home page. With the way UiPath is set up, you have a bunch of templates. Yeah, it's good to use, but you need to be able to use these up here. So a library is exactly the same as, for example, a class in C#, where you would go and set up a list of steps or activities that do a certain thing, but you use it so much, so you build it into a library and you can bring it into different processes. You essentially taking it out of a single use case and you're making it multi-use. Test automation, this is a specific one that got added recently that kind of allows you to build test automations differently from how it was originally done. I still generally tend to use the process because it's just a bit more clean. But yeah, this is kind of your home page. This is really what you want to know about. If we go back to our program, so your main.xaml is kind of your base file. All of your, whenever you run the automation, this is the first thing that gets run. All of these extra ones can essentially be seen as, I would not say a class, but separate entities. So if we look at my XAML or my main file, I'm invoking, okay, yeah. All of these are called workflows, but essentially what I'm doing is I've got my main and I invoke a secondary workflow within it. So main is where you like say, okay, you're going to do this, 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 and this. But then instead of putting all that code into a single file, you're essentially splitting it out into multiple files so that you can reuse that file like a library in a different automation. So, for example, this one, what last year we had category device zone were our 3 things. So I go through and I test all 3. Yeah, it's been a while since I've had a look at this file, but yeah, we also had, and this is, I'll quickly give you guys this. So input dialog. Okay, let's go one step back. So this is your project view. It is essentially the same as, let me search, yes. Let's try 2022. I just want to get something up so I can show you guys a direct comparison between the two. Or because I know a lot of you, the only real coding you've done is with Visual Studios. Now, all of them generally use the same layout. I want to say the Node.js is a bit different, but essentially they all do this, have a similar layout. So I'm just going to go through and just make the comparison between the two so you generally understand how the studio works. It kind of gives you guys a bit more a running start. So this project view here is exactly the same as this. We have all our code listed out, plus then our dependencies. Dependencies become really important. You can think of them as like, if I want to, for example, let's take the Excel activities. If I want to work with Excel files within my automation, yes, you can use the UiPath Excel activities, but let's say you want something that's not there. You go get a external package. So you just go to manage packages, you search through for the one you want, and you install it. Then your activities list gets updated. For example, here you can see we've got a few extras from Balareva. What else? No, your project.json is just, it's like your .sln from Visual Studios. But yeah, so with last year we had authentication or authorization built into the applications. You guys are probably going to have it this year as well. You need to enter a username and a password before you can start it up, because the first thing you're going to see is the login page. So if we look at our layout, first thing we're going to be doing is invoking the login flow, which was broken out. Here you can see we've got a big activity. Now, this big activity is essentially we're telling it, hey, we're going to be working on this website, and I want you to do the following on it. So that would be like click the login button, type in the username, password, remember me, we want to check in, and then we click login. Once this is done running, it comes back to our main flow. Nice thing about breaking it out into separate flows is you can bring in arguments. So you could say, okay, for the login, I'm going to need a username and a password. The direction just says, is this information coming into the flow or is it going out of the flow? So we are logging in, so we want to get the username and the password in. Then back on our main, as soon as we invoke the login, it's going to say, hey, you need to give me a username and a password. So we feed it in with our import arguments. You see, we said, okay, we're going to give you the username and the password. Where do we get that? Variables. What makes this different from Visual Studios is the fact that trying to find one. I didn't really initialize variables in this project. Okay, maybe this, where your variables aren't within your code. You don't go up here. It's what makes UiPath a bit different from if, for example, you want to use Power Apps. Your variables are stored here at the bottom. And then arguments are essentially this. So what is this flow expecting? And then, okay, so for example, login doesn't have any external variables that it's using. Same with our test cases. Could be different, but variables are essentially storing data within the flow. This main would be a flow, and arguments are how you get data passed between different flows. So yeah, we invoked it. It did its thing. It ran. It logged us in. Now we can actually start our testing. So I did mine a bit differently. I allowed the user to multi-choice, so they could either test only one individual part of the application, or they could test all of them at the same time. It just depended on what they clicked. So we just checked what did they click, and then we invoke the workflow to test our different parts. I'm not going to run through all of them, but we can do, for example, zone. So zone is expecting the data that we're going to be testing against. So the way we got that is this browser file. So all our data was stored in an Excel file. What we do is we browse, we go fetch that data, and we read it. Essentially, the browse file outputs a file item. So like a variable within the flow that says, okay, this is essentially an entire spreadsheet, in this case, stored in a variable. You can do with it whatever you want at this point. So we give the zone our test file, or the test file data path, and the to test. When we get here, you can see we have a read range, which is essentially all we're doing is reading a bunch of items from a spreadsheet. And then we are doing an assign, which is just same as a for loop, but this time we just assigned it before the time. Then we loop through all this. So when you do a read range, it gets read into a data table. You guys need to get really familiar with the flow, the layout of a data table, because it does not matter which part of the industry you're in, data tables get used everywhere. You need to know it's essentially a very special type of variable that everybody uses a bit differently. So in UiPath, the way they do it here is not the same as what you would use it in C# or something, but it's essentially just a specialized array. But essentially, yeah, we take looping through it, we're going row by row, feeding enough information. And then as we do that, you can see we doing a bunch of steps. So again, we have a big connector that says, okay, you're going to be using a browser, and this is the page you're going to be using. Then we have all the manual steps within it, which is the same as like a click or a type into basic stuff. Anything essentially with this automation, you're just mimicking user interaction, but it can go a lot deeper. For testing, generally, you're just mimicking user information, but you automated it so that you don't actually have to do it manually. That's the gist of it. So we're feeding in all the information, and we do it a bunch of times. And then based on the output we get, we either going to know if the test passed or failed. Yeah, we going through this entire bottom part is just logic that checks so we created an item. Is the item the same as what we are expecting from an output perspective? If it is, we say shop. We write back into the Excel spreadsheet. We've passed. Cool. We can go on to the next item. If it didn't, we say it failed. And if we do get an error page, we log down the error page and say, okay, this is what it said failed. It needs to be checked out. That's essentially what we're doing with this test. Yeah, there's a lot happening in the individual test cases. I'm not going to run through everything, but essentially have a look at your activity lists. Most of them are extremely in depth. If you don't find something that you need, the easiest place to go is, I'm going to quickly pull it up and I'll also paste that in the chat. Just give me 5 seconds. I'm just quickly getting it to load. This is your Bible. If you want to work with, for example, the get table range activity, but you're not sure what exactly it's looking for, you just come to the docs and you search get table range. You're going to see the activity, and this is going to give you a really nice breakdown of what exactly it's looking for as inputs and what your output looks like. This page is kind of your Bible. I'm going to copy that and just drop it into the chat. Yeah, while I'm in the chat, let me just quickly run through. Yeah, one thing you guys need to understand is your developers. Anything you do in your spare time can be added to your CV, and GitHub is essentially your CV. Whenever you go for a job interview, 90% of the time they're going to ask you, hey, can we get your GitHub link? Because they want to go see, what have you done? What makes you better than the guy next to you? So the more impressive your GitHub page is, the more it plays in your advantage. You guys really need to understand that. It's just the way it works. You are a developer, you need to be able to prove your skills. GitHub is one of the easiest ways to do it. Yeah, I've kind of sang my song at this point on the UiPath side of things, just the basics, where you find everything, how do you do stuff. Oh, log message, also really important. All it does is it logs it to your running output. Yeah, your projects, currently the projects you guys are working on, keep them private, but as soon as you finish with the module, go and rework them, remove all the dodgy information, usernames, passwords, your student number, things like that. Clean up your projects, and then you make them publicly available. Generally, I would suggest you delete the original repository just because of the fact that you do have history on it, and then create a new repository with the correct information without all that things, so that the next person can't go back in your someone can't go back in your commitment history and actually pull the usernames and the passwords. So best idea would be, once you guys are done, take that repository offline, clean it up, and then upload it again as a new repository with all the sensitive information removed. These projects are a great way to bolster your CV. That's why we keep pushing for you guys to do it correctly. Like, sure, you can give me a repository with no README and just your project. I'm going to see it the exact same way someone who has no connection to you sees it, as garbage. Really, guys, the better you do in this stuff, the more it helps you in the long run. Because 9 times out of 10, if you're going to submit your CV, they're going to ask you for your GitHub link, and they're going to go through your stuff. These people are going to go look at your code from the perspective of a future employer. And if you did it garbagely, you're not going to get hired. It's really important that you present this in a way that actually works to your benefit. The Azure part of the program, not that important. You're not, you can, okay, so in terms of the Azure stuff, you guys can go get your certifications, or for example, what a lot of people do is, once you've done your training, you post your training on LinkedIn or somewhere, because that kind of gives the public world a view of, okay, this guy actually did it, so he probably knows how to do it in practice. That's why we're pushing so hard for you guys to get badges and stuff. The badges can be used on your profiles, either be it you could link it to your GitHub profile, or if you guys want to go pull out, you can build a free website. I know that gets used a lot, where guys build websites that they essentially use as a CV, where they list all these things and link it back to their certifications. There's a lot you can do. In terms of the Azure parts, it can be used, but I would say once this is done, take that stuff offline. Azure will charge you if you do something wrong. So once you guys are done with these projects, get them off your Azure subscription. That is really not something you want to gamble with. because real money is involved there. Yeah, your certifications are kind of how you prove the Azure or UiPath, that side of the things. Yeah, no. In terms of anything where you need to pay, rather get your certification or your badges, show those off. Once the homework is marked, you can make it publicly available. Because at that point, there's no use in keeping it private. That's my feeling on it. Maybe just clean up the repo a bit, make it all pretty and stuff, so that you could actually publicly present it. But yeah, you can make it public once it's been marked. I would not suggest you make it public before it's been marked, because that's kind of dumb. Yeah, so just to quickly get back on track, anybody got questions regarding Project 4? Let's quickly run through. Just maybe a hands up. Who of you would be able to use the UiPath Studio? It's actually, I wonder if I can get, I don't think I have polls enabled. Check. No polls. Okay, no, we're gonna have to just work on our hands. Let's go in order of things. Who has installed the studio at this point? It's probably only going to be like 3 or 4 of you. We've got one hand. Wow. So out of 126 of you, we've only got one person, okay, 2, that's installed the studio. I suggest you guys do this sooner rather than later, because there can be errors during the process. It can give you issues. There are a few really good YouTubers out there. I think one thing I will maybe just do is give you guys, let's see if I can grab the, give me 5 seconds. I just want to quickly see if I can grab this. There's a Discord server that is pretty much, if you're looking for RPA help and these guys can't help you, then essentially it might not exist what you're trying to do. I suggest you join it, even especially if you want to go into a RPA direction in your career. But yeah, for now, yes, you can go ask questions there if you get stuck on something. These guys are extremely active on the channels. Oh, yeah, so just a show of hands with the recording at least, who thinks they will be able to manage to get this stuff, or at least Project 4 somewhat sorted. Ish. Okay, no, it's still climbing. I wanted to say, damn, only 5 of you. That's not really all that fun. Yeah, 10 is not all that great either, but we at least gave you guys. Did I copy the UiPath link? No, I did not. These 2 should help you quite a bit, especially go through the documentation, guys. These people did an amazing job with it, especially when you, yeah, I would say I prefer them above Stack Overflow users. Stack Overflow has kind of gone backwards in terms of how they treat people. They are better or more, yeah, they're a lot more active and friendly than your Stack Overflow guys. Yeah, the UiPath forum is also a great place to go ask questions. It just it takes a while for the guys to, yeah, some of the questions. I'm not gonna say all of them. And then Academy. Let me get you guys that. That is also a big one. Let's quickly go. If you're looking for training to do that specifically RPA orientated, this is going to be a lot of work. Let's give it time to load. There was 2 or 3 of them. I would choose. Oh, why are you going to? Oh, okay, I'll do that later. I would suggest you start out with the new to automation things. They kind of guide you through the process of using their software, essentially. Someone still got a hand up. Is that a question, Anne? Just check the chat. The videos on project 3 as services model 3. Yeah, no, we gave you guys the bare bones basic. You guys need to go do the actual work to get it up to standard. That's kind of the whole idea of the project. We just gave you the things to get a running start. Yeah, I would suggest you guys set up this stuff under your personal accounts because it kind of travels with you then. Don't set it up under your university account because as soon as your university account gets disabled, you essentially lose access to all of this stuff. Any other questions? Or is everybody happy? Yeah, no, check. Guys, the whole thing is just attend. We want you to attend the sessions, get some community engagement. Not, I can't remember I had anything all that special to contribute to last year, but you just attend so that you can actually get some experience. You're talking to people with years more experience than you. So you have the ability to ask questions, get help. It's good for you. Jackie, if you can just check that last one. Yeah, okay. Cool. Anybody else got a question or is everybody sorted? So I don't want to keep you guys any longer than necessary.
Okay, if there's no other questions, then I think we can thank Richard and then we can close the session. Thank you, Richard. This was very insightful. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.